When discussing a work as time-honored and loved as Frankenstein, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to, cover all the things. Well, that would take literally years, and I'm not that smart, so I'm gonna do what I want to do instead, which is basically gush for a while about how much I love this book, and then segue neatly into how books mess with your brain. Also, content note for murder and stuff. Frankenstein has a lot of thematic layers, and it turns out some of it is pretty violent. As usual, I'll stay away from graphic descriptions, but you know how it is with the power of suggestion and intrusive thoughts. So, that's whatever, do what you need to about it. And here we go. One rainy afternoon in 1816, while a really big volcano was disrupting the summer plans of everyone across Eurasia, 3 bored poets had a contest to see who could best scare the living jeebus out of the other 2. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley came out the winner, and it was not even close. She rewrote the story as a novel and published it in 1818, basically inventing the sci-fi genre. She'd later say that she never meant to write anything scientifically plausible, but to tell a sort of ramped-up super event that said something true about people. And I could be reading this wrong, but apparently Charles Darwin had read the book and was like,
"Nah, but all that crazy shit could totally happen."
And that's obviously a direct quote from Darwin's seminal book On the Origin of Species. Don't look it up. I don't know. People read these things the way they want to, I guess, or the way their experiences and systems of thought tell them to, like how people read Darwin, or more specifically, read something about Darwin written by someone who may or may not have read Darwin, and immediately respond with, "I'm not a monkey." And Darwin is like, "Yeah, I know, that's not what I said. Monkeys and humans have a common ancestor." You know what? Never mind. Anyway, people still think she was speculating on the possibility of science overcoming death or whatever, but as Shelley herself wrote in 1831,
"I shall not be supposed as according the remotest degree of serious faith to such an imagination. Yet in assuming it as the basis of a work of fancy, I have not considered myself as merely weaving a series of supernatural terrors. The event on which the interest of the story depends is exempt from the disadvantages of a mere tale of specters or enchantment. It was recommended by the novelty of the situations which it develops, and, however impossible as a physical fact, affords a point of view to the imagination for the delineating of human passions more comprehensive and commanding than any which the ordinary relations of existing events can yield."
And so she frames the lens through which she intends this book to be read, as a fantastical exaggeration of basically the human condition and stuff. Argue what you like, there are times when I wish every author would write a preface like that, even though people don't usually read the preface. Fast forward 204 years, and Frankenstein might be my favorite story of all time. At least I've called it my favorite story for the longest part of my life, and it has been a more consistent companion to me than, say, The Count of Monte Cristo or Spider-Man's origin story. I find that kind of frightening. I could talk for days about the shadow it casts over pretty much all of literature from 1818 to the present, its impact on horror, science fiction, slasher movies, and most importantly, the Terminator franchise, but I do want to keep this down to half an hour or so if I can, and I will already fail. I first read a pen and ink graphic novel adaptation when I was 10, maybe younger, which I now believe might have been kind of young for it. Just a little bit. The artwork in this book defined the Gothic aesthetic for me to this day. Desperate black lines that seemed hastily scratched into the paper, heavy and consuming shadows broken by sparse, mercilessly white light, terrified and disgusted faces, and then the monster, a looming shadow whose cracked, desiccated face was etched with sorrow and suffering and stitches, and whose eyes seemed to glow with the menacing certainty that life may be good, but humanity is not. He was scary looking, but not. But kinda. It's hard to describe. Familiar, but also alien. Dead, but more fully alive than I was. And then I returned it to the library and never saw it again. I've looked, and to this day I can't find it anywhere. In the digital age, it is a paper orphan left out of sight and unavailable to new minds, maybe forever. Even younger than that, at 5 or 6 years old, I was obsessed with the monster. The idea of a walking, breathing, superhuman product of necrotic surgery and electrical reanimation terrified and fascinated me. Like the Hulk, but homemade. Imagine if you could build your own monster. How crazy would that be? Part of me wanted to be him. The whole power fantasy thing was already in my head. I wanted to be big and strong and scary like the monster was. Sometimes I felt lost or abandoned like the monster was. I was often cornered or surrounded, treated derisively and violently like the monster was. It made me constantly afraid like the monster was. I sometimes indulged in what felt like a reasonable inclination to vengeance, like the monster did. But this creature, let's call him the creature, as in created animal being. It's not fair to call him the monster just because everybody else did. The creature never chose violence in his own defense, whereas I did, often. And when I did, I was mostly undefeated. I was small, but I could be vicious. The fear stayed, but the violence against me eventually stopped. Part of me wanted to be him. At 6 years old, I hadn't read the graphic novel yet. There weren't any faithful adaptations in film yet, and I wouldn't have had access to them if there were. All I had were poor, cartoonish parodies and imperfect parallels. But somehow I knew there was more to him than that. And then one day this graphic novel fell into my life, and I devoured it. I never felt the fear I expected reading that story, never felt any of the thrill or horror that Shelley intended to awaken in the reader. All that my childish mind found in those pages was the confirmation of things I already knew, that the world is beautiful, that there are things like art and kindness and love, but that there are also things like cruelty and rejection and isolation, and that some people are just gonna have a really hard time reconciling all of that. In the pages of Frankenstein, I found validation. And let me remind you, I was about 10 years old, not exactly a deep thinker. Part of me wanted to be him. And a part of me that I couldn't understand yet knew in some way that I already was him. Just a little bit. In other words, for a long time, I was wrong about him, and for what felt like a very long moment, I nearly let that immature understanding lead me down a dark road.
At the risk of overstepping the boundaries of my role here, I feel compelled to remind you that you were threatened and physically bullied as a child, and that violence is a valid response to immediate physical threats.
Oh my God, I know. You know, you got a real gift for stating the obvious.
I thought you were beating yourself up for things you did as a child.
Uh-huh. Well, I do feel seen, so, thank you for that.
I should like to remind you that I am also a spiritual descendant of Frankenstein's monster.
That's literally true. Funny, I didn't think of that. Do you have an insight you would like to share?
Only that you'd better watch your fucking mouth when you talk about my sad revolutionary boy.
Oh, don't worry, bud. This is gonna be good, I promise.
Who by fire and who by water? Who in the sunshine? Who in the nighttime? Who by high ordeal? Who by common trial? Who in the month of May? Who by very slow decay? Who shall I say is calling?
Hi there, I'm the Silver Samaritan, but you can call me Sampai Rengoku. Don't actually do that, though. That'd be inappropriate and weird. And boy howdy, I can kinda relate to a guy who read a book and thought everything in it was true. My formal education was unconventional. It started normally enough. Kindergarten at 5 years old, experimental gifted program in the 2nd grade, chronic illness and an anxiety disorder by 4th grade. Kid stuff. Part of the program at my elementary school allowed for Catholic students to be enrolled in a religious education program run by the diocese. Diocese in this case being Catholic speak for territory the size of the continental United States that a single bishop administrated like a fiefdom. It was essentially a cakewalk. Simple memorization of simple doctrine from a simple textbook about belonging and penance and Jesus and stuff. This class seemed to have a different weight compared to the math, science, English, second language, and social studies classes. In those early childhood years, I can't remember a subject that wasn't pure memorization, except for religion. It seemed to have something of an urgency to it that the other subjects didn't have. If you failed math or science, that was bad. You got left back a year and had to try again. If you failed religion, it was implied that you were risking eternal fire, and not in a fun, cool 80s thrash album cover way. One popular story we were told to reinforce this was the biblical story of the fall of Satan, the brightest star in the sky who was cast by Saint Michael into the depths of the lake of fire, the most beautiful, most powerful of all the angels, who, through pride and hubris, became the ugliest and most reviled, the one who said he would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. Satan's cautionary tale was told to us as something from the beginning of time, and a true story. Of course it wasn't, but we were not equipped to parse the differences between historical eyewitness accounts versus a poetic apocalypse written by a man who may or may not have been working under the influence of his exposure to a natural gas leak. And now the part where I say, spoilers ahead! For a book that is, at time of recording, 204 years old. I'm pretty sure the clock runs out on spoilers after like a week now, but thought I'd be nice about it. I'm also going to, briefly and badly, summarize the story as I go. In the highly likely event that you've already read the book, well, sorry. If you haven't, do it anyway. It's good, and I'm not gonna do it justice. Anyway, the creature is born, he is rejected, he goes out into the world and learns about cruelty and violence. Sound familiar? If so, I'm sorry. My education at least had the virtue of being somewhat organized. For the most part. The closest thing the creature ever gets to a formal education, he gets through a crack in a wall. While hiding out on a farm, he learns how to speak and read by observing the residents in the house, who are unaware that he is watching them. All day. Every day. It's okay though, he's a good person. They're good people too, he can tell. They treat each other with kindness and mutual support, things he has never seen before but is now drawn to. Even though his life has been an unbroken experience of rejection and violence, the creature believes that these people might offer him friendship one day if he can just choose the right moment to offer them his. In the meantime, he chooses anonymous kindness, using the cover of night to tend the garden and keep the grounds. Obviously, this all ends horribly for him, and he's driven back into the surrounding forest to hide and forage, never to again attempt human friendship. It's at this critical moment of complete isolation and despair that he discovers books. 3 books, not counting Victor's journal, which he also reads, and man, that's not a pretty scene. The 3 books are Plutarch's Lives, The Sorrows of Werther, and Paradise Lost. These are really good books, especially if you like devils. Oh, the creature says that Plutarch lifted his mind out of the depression of ostracism, or as he puts it,
He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflections to admire and love the heroes of past ages.
etc. But we have to remember, the creature is still a relatively inexperienced child, and these are the first and only books he has ever read. Plutarch looked at the lives of 48 ancient Greek and Roman patriarchs and paired them up to contrast their virtues and vices. Figures like Solon, Pericles, Alexander, and Caesar are, at least up to the day the creature reads them, framed as heroic, virtuous, wise, and other noises. One might also consider that they may have been colonizing murderous proto-fascist assholes obsessed with power. Some of them definitely were. Alexander and Caesar? Cancelled. This wouldn't occur to the creature, and it seems to me that of the 3 books, Plutarch has the least impact on our creature's future anyway, because, you know, he reads the other 2 books and becomes an anarchist. That's funny to me. Outside of the journal in his coat pocket that explains his own origins, Plutarch's Lives is the closest thing to a true story that the creature will ever read. But it's also kind of fiction because ancient historians were not great at fact-checking. Looking at you, Herodotus, Egyptians have thicker skulls because they habitually shave their heads? Where the fuck did you pull that from? Anyway, Goethe's Werther is described briefly by the creature as being all despondency and gloom, something he could relate to. He also says that Werther's suicide, spoilers for Goethe's novel that is 2.5 centuries old, elevates the character to godhood. Now that I think about it for half a second, probably not a good book to give to a child, but his favorite of the three, and mine, is Paradise Lost. If you don't know, that's John Milton's 1667 retelling of the biblical creation story, combining the first few chapters of Genesis with the wild extended DMT trip that is the Book of Revelation, and some of his own ideas about women, which haven't aged well. In Milton's retelling, Satan, not humanity, not God, but Satan, is the protagonist. He might actually be English literature's first proper anti-hero. But that's for another video, maybe. Big maybe. Satan is created, elevated, and then dumped by God. He swears vengeance and spends the rest of the story trying to get it. But you can't kill or even hurt God, so Satan goes after the people God loves. Literally the only two people in the world at that point. God loves them, so Satan hates them. And I'm pretty sure he knows the whole situation is basically futile. Those of you who have read Frankenstein or literally anything from the Romantic era, stay with me here. Now, as I said, he reads these books at a crucial moment. To this point, he has endured nothing but abandonment, abuse, even his own attempted murder, and then violent rejection by the handful of people in whom he has witnessed kindness. His every effort to reach out to others has been met with fear and violence. He can't understand any of it, even blames himself for being hideous. It's unfair, and on some level, he knows it. And these three books, especially the one about Satan, give him a lens through which to understand his own life so far. So doing, these books also give him a sense of selfhood and an awareness of his own will. As he will later tell Victor, he reads all three books as true historical accounts. If such things as these have happened before, then it must follow that he can find and confront his own creator, giving himself not only purpose, but a right to understanding and maybe something like happiness. From this point on, he becomes as much the driver of his own destiny as any of us ever do. On a personal note, I think it's relevant to say here that Frankenstein, as a book, or as a graphic novel in my case, gave me, my childhood self, a lens through which to understand some aspects of my own life up to that point. I think you're supposed to sympathize with the creature though, not see your reflection in him. We're not the same, but there are parallels. I felt put together wrong, felt like I was floundering in a world full of opaque rules and hostility, trying to somehow escape or find a measure of peace in it. And I didn't understand it. I didn't even know I was queer till like 2018. But I guess everybody reads these things a bit differently. For instance, you might read the creature's interpretations of these books as a self-directed education in rudimentary revolutionary theory, and his actions as a good and just uprising against a self-serving authority that considers the creature to be, at best, necropolitical collateral damage. And you know what? Maybe you'd be right. I don't know. I'm not good at reading anymore. Really haven't absorbed a lot of political theory. It sounds smart though, right? There's probably something there. Somebody should do something with that. I mean, 10-year-old me read it as being about an individual who endured bullying, read some books, and then went, well, that was neat. Anyway, it's clobbering time, which is arguably also a correct reading. So you know, there's a range of possible interpretations is all I'm saying. Anyway, it's interesting to me that at this point, the creature still hasn't chosen violence. Yet. He just wants to talk. To Victor. Ask him some questions. You know, diplomacy. He wants to call on God and demand the answers he believes he's owed. And a companion. Even the mean, arbitrary God of Paradise Lost knew that loneliness created for you by others is cruel. If he has a friend, the two of them can disappear into the wilderness and never bother humanity again. Satan immediately became bitter. The creature doesn't want that. He still basically wants peace and happiness, wants to be at least relatively kind, even if it's just by making himself scarce, and has enough of a vision to see that Satan's choices don't all have to be his. It's only if Victor, this God-man who made the creature what he is, strange and alone, only if Victor refuses his demands that the creature will resort to, actions we might find less sympathetic. He's not gonna get what he wants, by the way, because, you know, Victor is kind of an unreliable dipshit. This is just a sliver of the genius in Mary Shelley's storytelling. She put the most gentle of dispositions, the most voracious of intellects, into the heart of an infantile, naive brute, gave him a parent who abandoned and forgot him, let him loose on a world where people at every turn consistently fear, hate, and harm him without the slightest provocation, and he still thinks he can be reasonably happy in a world full of people like that. So when this beautiful, gentle soul finally gives up and starts just murdering people, that fills a reader with deep sadness. But not necessarily total disapproval. At some point, you may even come to the uncomfortable realization that you have been emotionally corralled into sympathizing with a serial killer. The kind of person who stalks and kills an entire family. And that leads me to the part where the so-called monster is actually a monster. Now, everybody's got some kind of opinion on what makes a monster. Some say Victor is the real monster, others say it's humanity in general, and a few say it's the monster, calling him anything from a terrorist to an incel.
Careful now.
Huh?
You are getting dangerously close to some thin fucking ice.
Don't worry, I'll be very respectful of your spiritual ancestor. Come on, man, it's me here. I'm not gonna just say the creature is an incel and walk away.
We shall see.
Yeah! Anyway... Okay, so I am 100% not doing that. Don't get me wrong, there is arguably a reading to be had there, what with the dejection and the blackpilling and the murder sprees. Actually, there are a lot of parallels. Maybe somebody smart can do something with that. But I have limited time, resources, and mental bandwidth for that. Also, there's more going on here than just a surface reading with some knowledge of 21st century events would suggest. So, when the creature, who appears to have chosen a name by this point, so let's call him Adam from now on, even though nobody in the book seems to respect that, when Adam confronts Victor for the first time, he already has a deal to offer. Adam wants an Eve. And I want to be sensitive here, but you know, a situation like this doesn't have a template. What do you do when you're one of a kind, the world hates you, the single biggest literary influence on your life is a biblical fanfic written by a misogynist, and you now have the ear of your creator who, need I remind anyone, abandoned you to the elements at birth, hoping you would die. Jesus, I said I wasn't going to talk about incel shit, but this does kind of read like a manifesto. Anyway, Adam demands of his creator a female companion, promising in return to stop murdering Victor's family. God, why? Yes, he has started to do that, kind of accidentally at first, but by this point he's gotten pretty systematic. It's extortion, basically, and kind of, a little bit, terrorism? I mean, tell me I'm wrong. I still want to root for this guy, but it's getting, you know? I'm a little conflicted here. Rejection and loneliness can do fucked up things to your head, and extreme rejection and loneliness will do extremely fucked up things to anyone. But I don't care who you are or what you've been through. It's weird to demand a woman as a reparation payment. It's weird to demand the creation of another human life as conventionally hideous as yourself so that she'll have no choice but to join you as your companion. That, or she'll suffer the same shit that you've been through for years already. Like, we don't have time to unpack all of that. That would be a whole video on its own, arguably about incel shit, which I hate. I don't want to do that, even though I keep bringing it up and totally don't have to. I know, the circumstances are also really weird. It's really weird to be the electrically reanimated product of necrotic surgery, sure. And it's really weird to violently ostracize somebody because you don't like the look of them. You know, maybe Victor and a handful of authors and humanity at large all had a hand in the violence that Adam does, but what is he responsible for? Is that the point here? As gentle and curious and intellectually superior and just Really fucking special as Adam is, he is still influenced deeply by his environment. Not just the cruelty and rejection and violence he's endured, but also the books he's read, the language he has internalized, the things he has overheard. He knows that. He is a revolutionary figure. He is the downtrodden, the dejected, the disenfranchised, maybe the most disenfranchised person theoretically possible. Although I'm not necessarily the best judge of that. He's also framed as being intellectually and spiritually superior to humanity. His misery can mostly be attributed to Victor's negligence and humanity's cruelty. His demands and thinly veiled threats make a kind of sense. But he has been affected, turned a little, by the influence of that same world that has been cruel to him and rejected him so forcefully. The same world that Adam is trying to reject. He wants to lose himself in the rapture of witnessing flowers or a sunrise or just love and kindness between people who aren't himself, and yet these things fill him with a longing for death because he is alone. The world has gotten its claws into him. He is a free agent in the world, one who has weighed the cost of inaction versus the cost of violence in ways no one else can. He's a product of not only extreme scientific experimentation or his own thoughts and conclusions, but also of his environment. An environment governed by entitled men who write books about history, philosophy, mythology, and romance. He is separate from the world and inextricable from it. It's paradoxical and probably tragic. Adam, while promising to exit the world, is demanding what makes sense to him based not only on what's natural, but on everything the world has taught him. And you know what? Victor, who thinks himself a genius above everyone else, harboring a learned and towering sense of entitlement to Elizabeth, seems to think this is reasonable. Until he doesn't. But he doesn't change his mind for any good reason. He just panics and throws everything in the trash. I'll say it again, Victor is an unreliable dipshit. I believe that is uncontroversial. It is at this point that Adam makes the creepiest, most ominous, and probably most famous pronouncement in the whole book.
Remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night.
Wow. That was unsettling.
I was the monster in a middle school play.
Ha! Don't know why I'm surprised. Anyway, you know what this little dickweed Victor does next? After a superhuman serial killer says this to him, he goes off and marries Elizabeth. Like, immediately. Of all the reckless, willfully hazardous shit Victor does, this is the recklessest, most willfully hazardousest, most brainlessly selfish move he has ever and will ever make. Because, well, Elizabeth belongs to him. Everyone told him so from the first day she was brought into his life by his rich, entitled, liberal parents. I mean, if you think about it, Victor is the real incel here. And no, I will not elaborate. So, Elizabeth never had any power, never had any control over her life. She was taken from her family as a child by strangers to another country, never saw her family again, and was basically betrothed from childhood to this rich dipshit Victor, because she was the prettiest child that these bourgeois Swiss assholes ever saw. No offense to anybody who's actually Swiss. And in the end, the one person who should have had sympathy for her murders her over a grudge with her dipshit husband. Nothing to do with her, nothing personal. At this point, it's just business. In murdering Elizabeth, Adam crosses a line that he hadn't before. Oh, he's murdered people, yeah, but he knew that he was taking a person out of the world, ending a soul like his own. Now he's just doing it to take something away from Victor. No remorse, not even the recognition that Elizabeth is a person who had lived and now does not. In this moment, he is a monster. He is the monster now. Everything that happens in this book is just bad. Nobody wins. Everybody dies. What is wrong with me? Why is this my favorite book? I sometimes use the word Frankenstein as shorthand, a little differently than most, I think. Usually when I hear Frankenstein used as a verb or an adjective, it's to do with sort of stitching some shit together into a semi-coherent unity. I Frankensteined a bike together from spare parts, or I Frankensteined this video essay and it shows. To me, this ignores the main theme of Frankenstein, which is also the main theme of The Terminator, most Greek tragedies, and ostensibly Iron Man 3. Whether through hubris, malice, envy, neglect, or whatever your biggest personality flaw is, we create our own demons. We are the authors of our own destruction. And the more powerful and privileged the author is, the more widespread the damage will be. If you Frankenstein a bike from spare parts, the story of that bike isn't over until the bike drives you insane and then kills you. If you Frankenstein a video essay, the story isn't over until that video essay has huge negative consequences for people close to you, and then you get dragged to death on Twitter for it. Whatever responsibility Adam has for his actions, and it can be argued that he has more responsibility than any ordinary person in his position would have had. Still, Victor, Milton, Goethe, Plutarch, that nameless guy who shot him, all had a hand in Frankensteining him into the monster who murders Elizabeth. His experiences on its own constitute a kind of Frankenstein's monster. It's crazy to think about it now, but, you know, part of me wanted to be him. Part of me knew I already was, and that could have gone way worse. As I got older, found my creative spark, made mistakes, and realized that in my growing arrogance, I've hurt people, I began to identify more with Victor. You know, the entitled, unreliable dipshit. These days, can't lie, I feel more and more like Elizabeth. Doomed, relatively powerless, and yeah, I'm pretty. I can own that. Finally, as I deconstruct and unpack the various influences that have contributed to whatever it is I've become, I again find myself looking at the monster and feeling a kind of uneasy relief. Maybe that's just what happens to us. And maybe we'll talk more about that another time. Assuming I'm still here, that is. Frankenstein has fallen disturbingly quiet since, and I guess that's good? Okay, well, if you liked the essay, regardless of whether you learned anything, please feel free to do YouTube things, such as like and subscribe, and tell me your feelings about it in the comments. Have I missed the whole point of Mary Shelley's masterpiece? Probably. Tell me all about that. You can also find words that I use on Twitter, pictures I publish on Instagram, and probably other social media things that I neglect to a greater or lesser degree. Because superhero things. I'm very busy with that. And if you would like to contribute to my increasingly tenuous material well-being like these amazing heroes do, and they are all amazing, everyone says so, the best way to do that is via Patreon. Link in the thing. You can also make one-time donations to my Ko-fi and maybe PayPal? I don't know. I'll figure that out later. Or not. I also want to give a big shout out to this video's guest reader, Zilla of Zilla's Athenaeum, the former being a beautiful and generous human, the latter being a great and fascinating YouTube channel with far too few subscribers. Do what you need to with that information. Oh, and I guess thanks to Tank, too, for his contributions. Not gonna lie, though, kinda wish we could've got Ron Perlman to read the creatures lines, but, you know, you work with what you got. So, this was fun. We should do it again, right? Maybe I'll do another video like this. Eventually. I have other ideas and scripts in various stages of incompleteness right now that I'd really like to finish, but I do want to eventually make another video explaining why the story of Frankenstein should scare the shit out of all parents everywhere. Just in case this video here that you are watching right now did not do that. But until then, this is the Silver Samaritan saying good luck and create your own demons. I mean, stay safe. You know what? Never mind.